Whenever we talk about kind of the economic problems within the United States, we generally have both sides of the aisle disagreeing about either what the cause is or what the actual status is. When Democrats are in office, we're told the economy is great. When Republicans are in office, we're told the economy is great. And then we never really get to the heart of the very real problems that people are actually feeling. And this is not just about politics. This is also about generations. Typically, when Gen Z or millennials talk about how difficult things are, Gen X and boomers tend to say, well, you just need to work harder. And there's an element of truth to that. By the same token, there's also an element of truth that things have changed quite a bit within the economy since the time that older Gen Xers or boomers were going out and getting a job or buying a home. I saw a map a while back that showed that manufacturing was the predominant source of work in most states in 1990. You look at that today, and it's the predominant source of work for only one state. And even then, it's somewhat questionable when you dig into some of the data. So it's obvious that the economy has changed rather significantly. The question is what is the source of the problems that we're experiencing? Because the things that Gen Z and millennials are talking about are actually very real. It's not all just complaining. And so we have to be able to identify that, because if we can't provide a good answer, I promise you there's a lot of forces out there offering answers to Gen Z and millennials, and they're listening. And it's not going to be good enough to simply respond with just work harder when hard work isn't actually being rewarded the way it used to be. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode of Making the Argument. I'm your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our resident historian, political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines. How you doing, Christian?
Good afternoon, comrade. No.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, this is the episode where we find out if Christian has gone full circle from libertarian to monarchist to head of the proletariat. We're going to, that's just a joke. We hope. We'll see. We'll see. But to kind of set this out real quick, what we're going to do is what we do. We're going to frame this question. We're going to frame the issue that we're talking about so we can all be kind of on the same sheet of music. Then we're going to move forward and talking about the various perspectives with respect to the problem that we're looking at. And then hopefully we're going to be able to offer some insight, answers, possibly even some solutions, not just on a macro level, but perhaps on a micro level as well. So let's jump into it.
So I want to start this with a bit of a question for you.
Yeah.
I was asking you this a few days ago. Do you remember, like, 20-something years ago, 25 years ago, I don't want to date you too much, but when you were first getting started in the military and you were it was like private E2 or?
I enlisted, so when I went to infantry basic training in Fort Benning Jr., I was an E1.
You were an E1.
And then I got promoted to E2 in basic training.
Is that like a cool thing, or?
It's one rank above. I think the pay differential was maybe like $40.
Is an E1 like the absolute lowest rank in the military?
I went in at the absolute lowest you can possibly go. When Tina and I got married, I was an E2.
I'm assuming the second lowest.
Yes. So when Tina moved out to North Carolina with me, and she was still looking for a job, I think the first job you got was at Old Navy.
Out in North Carolina,
yeah. Old Navy. So the first job she got out of North Carolina was Old Navy. So she was making the
I was about to ask you, how much were you making when you first joined the military?
I think so.
It was like $1,700 a month, but that's with BAH and everything.
So BAH is basic allowance for housing, which is tax free, and I think
I think it was $1,400 a month actually.
I think it was more like $4,000. It was not $1,700.
It wasn't.
It was closer to $4,000. So my and I don't even, was that take home or was that?
No, it was not take home.
I believe my take home pay the first year I was in the military was somewhere around $1,200 a month.
That was including separate rats and BAH.
So separate rations is the Army, instead of getting to eat at the chow hall, the Army gives you, and I think for a married couple of two, you got something like $200 a month for groceries in 1999. So we got about $200 to $300 a month for separate rations, which wasn't taxed. Then I got my jump pay, which was $150 a month extra on top of my.
And that's actually still the same. That jump pay is still the same.
They're changing it now.
Yeah.
And then it was, and then the basic allowance for housing, which I think was around $300 or something like that at that point.
Low.
So how much would you say that you were making a year when you first started?
Under $20,000.
Under $20,000 a year.
About probably 17,000 a year.
Under
Or
20, under,
16,000
we'll say
a
under
year?
20.
So basically, the
now,
salary of the Virginia House of Delegates.
Yeah, so you did
Yeah.
you did have health care, right? But you had health care on base, so that's something, right?
Mhm.
Like there's part of your overall compensation, but my take home pay was less than $20,000.
Okay, so first off, to me that's just crazy.
And that
But
includes all of the allowances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but here's I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. It's not just me prying into how much money were you
Yeah,
making
got it.
25, 26 years ago. In your mind, I'm willing to bet as a 19-year-old,
Yeah.
right, who was joining the military and just got married, that you had some figure in your mind of like, if I was making X amount a year, I'd be set. Not that you'd be, Elon Musk rich,
No,
right?
I
But
can tell you the story. We were in Hawaii and some guy
Stationed in Hawaii.
Some guy was like super like sold on Quickstar, and he decided he was going to come and try to get us into his pyramid scheme. And he was like, we have people that if you get enough people below you selling this, we've got people making $50,000 a year. Like you can make an extra $30,000 a year. What would you do with? Just think. I want you to think about what you would do with $50,000 a year. And Nick and I were both like, wow.
What would I don't know.
What
I
would
guess
we do
we'd
with
probably put all
50,000?
of our gold in a big vault and swim in it like Scrooge McDuck,
Yeah,
right?
like,
the idea of making.
I remember us being like, that would solve all of the problem.
Yeah. So and this wasn't 99. This would have been like 2002.
Yeah, like
I
think Lily was a baby because I remember I had just pushed Lily out, and that guy was trying so hard to sell us on freaking Quickstar that he came in the room after I had just had her, and I was like, what in the world is this guy doing in the room? Yeah, sorry.
So at that point we thought that making between $50,000 to $60,000 would have been just
So, and that's also crazy to me because like today it's like the average salary is like $50,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so like the reason I'm asking this is because I was talking to Hamilton about this recently, and we kind of have something similar. We're a generation younger, and so you fast forward like 15 years later, and for guys like me and Hamilton, it's kind of similar. It's not the same numbers, right? But it's a similar situation where I remember like 10 years ago thinking to myself, oh man, if I could just be making like 80 or 90 or $100,000, oh my gosh, if I was making $100,000, I'd be set. I wouldn't be Elon Musk rich again, right?
Yeah.
But like there'd be no issues.
The first house we bought which was in 2004 or 2003. The first house we bought was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, decent yard.
It was a 1,200 square foot house for $94,000.
That again,
1,200 square foot.
But here
It was bigger than
here's the
No, it
thing,
wasn't.
like I hear these things and the first thing that comes to my mind is, oh well, inflation just explains all of that. And to a degree that is correct, right? But the thing is, it's not entirely, because when I said earlier, like, oh man, I remember like 10, 15 years ago thinking to myself, well, if I was just making 80,000, 90,000 a year, I'd be set. Well, the GDP per capita in the US is something in the 80,000 range. It's between like 80 and 90,000 a year. That's GDP per capita. There's plenty of people out there that are making 80 or 90,000 a year that feel like that they're not rich at all.
Oh no.
And so again, to me, it's just crazy how I think that there's a lot of people out there, myself included, and probably a lot of our listeners too, that are probably thinking to themselves like, that goal that I set 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20, 25 years ago, that goal that I set in the past, I've now obtained that goal and I feel like I'm just swimming in place and I haven't actually gone anywhere. Like it's a moving target.
Yeah.
And for some reason it keeps moving, further away from me or as far away from me as I'm swimming closer to it. And again, for a lot of people, they probably think, well, inflation is the reason for it. And again, to a degree, that's correct, but that's not entirely the reason. The bigger reason is a concept that has become, it's not really fully mainstream yet, but I guarantee you it's going to become mainstream soon, which is hyperfinancialization. And the reason that it's called hyperfinancialization is because it's different from normal financialization. Financialization simply means that financial assets are going up in value, that money is being poured into financial assets rather than other potentially tangible assets. So you're seeing like
Stocks.
banking or insurance or stocks rather than like real estate or manufacturing or like working with your hands. But hyperfinancialization implies that you're seeing just kind of this distortion that's just kind of flown off the rails.
Yeah.
And again, I think that actually explains more of why this is an issue than just simple inflation does.
Well, and to give people an idea, this is, if I had to think of like one way to popularly explain this, it's when you were sitting there looking at the TV and you're being told that the stock market is at all-time highs, therefore the economy's good, and you feel like, what do you mean the economy's good? I can barely cover my mortgage. Or you're even thinking, I'd love to have a mortgage one day. And yet you're being told, well, because this number is high, because the GDP number is high, because the stock market, the NASDAQ number is high, therefore we're good. And you're like, no, something's not right here. And it would be.
You had this happen in the Biden era,
yeah.
right? Like Joe Biden and the Democrats were going out there in the 2024 election, even after he dropped out of the race, and was like, oh, but the stock market's at an all-time high.
Yeah.
The Biden economy is roaring. And most people, like, obviously, when they went into the voting booths, they were like, no, I don't care if the green line is at an all-time high. I don't feel like I'm at an all-time high.
Yeah.
I feel like that, that I'm losing. I'm falling behind. And you look at the states that delivered the victory for Trump, these are states that until Trump came along, they weren't Republican states. Like nobody can argue that Michigan was some sort of GOP stronghold before 2016, right? It was Obama won Michigan by like 10 points,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was a blue Democrat state. The reason that people in those type of states came out and voted for Trump was precisely to your point. Like they felt like that on paper, everything's going great, but I'm not doing great at all.
Well, and we can show stat over stat over stat that will demonstrate that like wages have not kept up with respect to there was, when you looked at like real wages and you looked at like the advancement of the stock market, typically there was something of a correlation. When one went up, the other went up. And then all of a sudden there was this major departure that took place. In fact, I think there's a website that's called What the Hell Happened in 1970.
WTF happened in 1971.
1971, right? So something happened, right? And the reason why this is so important to understand is because you think about 1970. Like in 1970, I wasn't born yet. I was born in 79. And it always takes a while for things to truly kind of, you feel the larger impact. But you can see this thing start to happen in 1970. And what's important to understand is that there's so many people out there saying it's that, like a lot of people on the right now are saying, well, it's bad trade deals and it's the fact that we outsourced our manufacturing. Elements of truth. The left is saying this is all about income inequality and this is all about the rich hoarding resources. We got to tax. Okay, some of that is, yes, and income inequality can be really, really bad depending on how you get to that income inequality. And we'll talk about that. So there are people who are identifying very, very real problems, but it seems like because they're so tied to whoever's in political office, and because there is such a push, such an incentive based off of election cycles to push this idea that, no, it's this problem. Here's the person you're supposed to be mad at, and here's the person you're supposed to be happy with, and this is the number you should pay attention to. And as long as I can manipulate things within the economy to make this number high, you have to vote for me and believe that things are getting better. Because all of that's going on, we find ourselves in this situation where numbers that was supposed to be meaningful, right? Where the S&P 500 is, where the NASDAQ is, where the stock exchange numbers are, what the GDP is, what the GDP, these numbers are in fact supposed to be meaningful with respect to what's going on with the economy. And yet, more and more, they're not meaningful to a significant portion of the population. And the old answers that we're getting are not good. And what's even worse than what's worse to the old answers are the new solutions that are being offered in many cases. So the framework that we want everyone to understand is that everybody's identifying some of the same problems. Wages are not keeping up. All the stock market's high and yet your life is not better. Things have gotten more expensive. It feels as if we're not building or making things anymore. We're relying on stock market speculation or the printing press to just print out more dollars. All of these things are very, very real, legitimate issues, and they are causing the problem that you see. So now that we've established that, we need to go into, okay, everyone stop for a second. We all agree that there's a problem. Let's put aside left, right for a minute. Let's put aside Republican, Democrat, because both of them have contributed to the problems. And let's try to start to identify what happened. Like what has made numbers that used to matter to everybody, not just an investment elite, or what made numbers that used to matter to everybody not matter to 70, 80% of the population anymore? Because something had to happen to make that happen. So let's go into that. But before we do, if you are looking for genuine value, right, I recommend True Classic, because the bottom line is it's summertime and a lot of us are out there. We're trying to get fit. Maybe we're spending more time in the t-shirts, the short sleeves. It's what I prefer. Today, I got dressed up. I'm wearing a polo because that's fancy for me, especially within the summer. And thankfully, True Classic doesn't just provide the t-shirts and fitness gear that I love. They provide everything else as well. So I can wear this super fancy polo. They also have button downs, which have quickly become my favorite. And by my favorite, I mean my wife's favorite, because if Tina likes what I'm wearing, that usually works out really well for me. Anyway, you should go to trueclassic.com right now. You can use trueclassic.com/Nick. You can look at the link in the description. Go there, check out what they got, because again, maybe you don't want to commit to the full True Classic wardrobe, even though I love it. Maybe you just want to date True Classic a little bit first. Maybe try out a packet of their t-shirts. Maybe try out some of the fitness gear. Highly recommend it. Plus, you can also find it in places like Costco and Target now as well. Right? So go to the link in the description, check out True Classic. Again, I've been a believer for several years now, and I become even more of a believer every year as they release new things that I can wear that I feel are comfortable and fit me the way they should, which is to say, it makes me look better than maybe my workout regimen would suggest, right? Which is great. I will take all the assistance I can get. trueclassic.com/Nick. Go check them out, and we thank them for sponsoring today's episode. All right. So, what's the real cause of all this, Christian?
So remember when you said WTF happened in 1971?
Yeah.
This is a common trope on the right because there's so many charts and graphs and everything that goes back to this. And the big story is that Nixon pulled us off the gold standard in that year. But it actually goes much further back than 1971. And I think that a lot of people on the right don't understand this. In some ways, I feel like that sometimes we give Nixon too much of the blame and not Bretton Woods or the economic side of what we call the post-war consensus, which is, we did a podcast on this recently, and there's a lot of elements to the post-war consensus, not just economics. But
right, wasn't there something wrong that he was trying to respond to, which is the real problem?
Nixon actually was trying to save the United States from losing all of its gold reserves by pulling us off the gold standard, because it was inevitable that we were going to lose all of our gold reserves if we had stayed on the gold standard. And the reason for this is because of a concept that the Belgian economist Robert Triffin identified in the late 1950s. Triffin came over to the United States, and he found something that nobody had found before, which is that the Bretton Woods system that had been in place, again, since the very end of World War II in 1944, was inevitably going to force the United States to either do one of two things, either abandon the gold standard or abandon the dollar as the world reserve currency.
And to give everyone an idea, too, Bretton Woods was, again, a financial agreement that was making the U.S. dollar the reserve currency. And again, that comes with certain advantages and disadvantages, but it is properly understood as kind of a manipulation of the international financial markets, or monetary markets, I should say, because it puts the U.S. dollar in a privileged position with respect to being the world's reserve currency. But again, the problem is that when you look at the power of what is currency? It's a medium of exchange. It's something I use in order to get something of value, because my little picture of a dead president on a Federal Reserve note, right, doesn't have intrinsic value in the sense that this piece of paper is valuable. right? A gold coin has value not just as currency, but as gold. A silver coin has value not just as currency, but as silver. These things have intrinsic value. Paper dollars don't have value unless they're backed by something. And for the vast majority of human history, paper currency was backed by something tangible, right? And now all of a sudden we're going into Bretton Woods, and there's still some tangibility there, right? It's still backed by something, but because of the way Bretton Woods is organized, it sets up the US dollar for failure in the sense, and this Belgian economist, which you're about to read from, identified that there was a problem here, is that you're trying to do too many things at once and you're not going to get away with it. So what was it that we were not going to get away with?
So right before I answer that question, I kind of want to play devil's advocate here for a lot of these people, because it's really popular right now to look back at what's happened in the last like 60 years or 60 to 80 years and be like, oh, we got screwed. The generation before us betrayed us. They sold us out. That's actually not the case. The architects of the whole thing, the whole post-war consensus, but especially the economic side, these actually weren't like evil cartoon villains that were trying to find ways to screw over the average man. You have to think about the context of the world that they inhabited and how it was very different than the world that we inhabit. We had just come out. I mean, Bretton Woods was actually taking place at the end of World War II. It hadn't even finished yet. It was 1944. Mm-hmm. We were wrapping up the bloodiest war in human history, and we were setting ourselves up for a Cold War with the Soviets. And so the idea is that we need to construct a globalized economy that the United States leads as the leader of the free world, as a backdrop against global communism, and as a hedge against a third world war. We did not want another global conflict right after two ones that had been fought back to back. And so the architects of Bretton Woods, the architects of the post-war consensus, like, these men were doing this stuff because they genuinely thought globalism will stop a third world war, and that integrating the United States as the leader of the global economy through the world reserve currency is going to be, economically one of the best ways that we can stop the spread of communism. And so these are very strong arguments in favor of this system. But the problem is that, as you hinted at, economists like Robert Triffin, and he was not the only one, I'll explain another one in a second, identified a fatal flaw in the system, which is that if the dollar is backed by gold, well, then you can swap them back and forth, right? You can go to a bank and you can say, give me gold for all the dollars that I have, and vice versa. But if the dollar is also the reserve currency of the world, and if the free world, the non-communist world, is trading with each other in dollars, well, then how are they getting the dollars? Because there's only one entity that can create those dollars, and that's the Federal Reserve in the United States. There's no central bank in Europe that can create it, except there's this thing called the Eurodollar system. Banks can loan dollars into existence. That's actually how most dollars are created. It's not just Federal Reserve money printing that creates it. It's bank loans that can create lines of credit. But again, for one man's debt is another man's credit, right? And vice versa. And so what this means is that if the United States is having to backdrop the gold and defend it through the dollar, but then it also has to supply dollars to the rest of the world in order for them to do trade, well, eventually you're going to inevitably create a circumstance where either the United States has to run a perpetual trade deficit to supply those dollars to the rest of the world, which would then hollow out the United States' industrial base, because how are you supplying the dollars except for the fact that you're importing goods? Or the European countries are going to be creating their own dollars through the Eurodollar system, but then that just inflates the number of dollars in circulation. And so eventually you'll have more even if the United States is run by Ron Paul, even if the federal government is running the most tight-shipped, fiscally conservative backdrop that you possibly could have, you would inevitably create more dollars in circulation than there is gold to back it up. And so you would create an imbalance there that would force the United States to, again, either drop the gold standard or drop the dollar as the reserve currency. And so Triffin identified this, and he gave testimony to Congress at the end of the 1950s, in December 1959, and then another set of testimony in 1960, where he warned Congress about this years in advance. And I read through his testimony, but there's one part at the very end here that I want to read
Yeah.
because it's kind of haunting. And he says, the real question at issue is not whether or not these or broadly similar reforms, and I'll get to what those reforms are, will be adopted in the end. It is whether political leadership in the United States and the other free countries will prove sufficiently enlightened and dynamic to adopt them in time, or whether they will be forced upon us by new crises and upheavals such as we experienced 30 years ago during the first years of the worst international economic depression that the world has ever known. He's obviously referring to the Great Depression.
Yeah.
And the reform that he suggested was that you create a neutral entity that is the reserve currency backdropped by the IMF. And so everybody kind of banks with the IMF. And the IMF is the one that's supplying the reserve currency of the world, still backed by gold. He didn't advocate for that. But he thought that that was the only way that you could avoid this problem of what eventually became known as Triffin's Dilemma. Well, nobody wanted to do that.
No. And there's good reasons why nobody wanted to do that.
And again, he's operating still on a globalist mindset, right?
Yeah.
He's we need these international organizations, because again, this is right after World War II, right? We need these international Western, intergovernmental organizations to be the ones managing, global trade and stuff like that, to keep the integration going, to keep the cooperation in the West going. But we just can't have the United States be the one supplying it because of that mathematical problem that we just talked about.
Yeah.
And so obviously using the mindset of the post-war consensus coming out of World War II, the whole Cold War dynamic, well, from his standpoint, it just made sense. Oh, we'll just do everybody will just have an account at the IMF, and that's how they'll settle trade transactions. But again,
then it comes to the question of who runs the IMF. Right?
And the United States didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
They didn't want to outsource their sovereignty to
and again, I think this, and again, we could go back. We're not going to do it right now. We could go back even further to the whole creation of the Federal Reserve System within the United States and what the implications were of that. And there's a book called The Creature of Jekyll Island. And again, there's always this idea that this is always nefarious, evil, rich bankers that are trying to do X, Y, and Z. And it's not to say that you can't point to perverse incentives created by J.P. Morgan and others, but it's always important to look into the context of what was going on at the time. So even when we look at the Federal Reserve, which I can't stand and would love to get rid of, you still understand why a bunch of bankers who had essentially had to bail out the U.S. dollar themselves wanted to come up with some sort of system that they thought could prevent doing this in the future and could potentially financially benefit them at the same time. Right? So you have all these various decisions that are taking place, usually with a crisis, right? There's a crisis point that forces people to look at the system as it currently exists and suggest that we've got to change things. And so we're going to come up with some sort of new overall system that's going to prevent X, Y, and Z. Remember, the Federal Reserve has two responsibilities, right? Prevent inflation and full employment. Those things don't make sense, right? But that's what their charter is for the Federal Reserve. Then you look at Bretton Woods. It's like, okay, now we've got another problem that we're trying to deal with post-World War II, where we have this massive threat in the form of the Soviet Union and communism. We're trying to get the West kind of all on the same sheet of music, both from a defense component. That's where you see eventually the manifestation of NATO and then the United Nations. You see a lot of these international organizations coming up as a result of World War II. Why? They wanted to prevent World War III. Understandable goal. You just came out of the two worst military experiences in all of human history between World War I and World War II. Tens of millions of people dead as a result. Now we have atomic weapons. So the point is not to say actually the Federal Reserve was a great idea, or actually Bretton Woods was a great idea, or actually, and then with Nixon, you had a crisis with Nixon where literally the French had showed up with boats saying, we want all of our gold now, here's your dollars.
I was actually right about to get to that.
So get to that story, and then I'll go to my next point.
There's an economist in France whose name does not pop up a lot, and I kind of wish that he did, because he lived a really incredible life. His name was Jacques Rueff. And if the audience ever gets a chance, I would highly recommend look this guy up, because he had a bit of a crazy life. He was in France, obviously. Throughout World War II, he was Jewish, and so the Nazis came after him, but he went into hiding, and he came out after the conflict, and he was like an arch conservative.
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet that most of our audience would read his stuff and would probably place him up there with somebody like Friedman or Hayek in terms he was right. He was right on the money. He was an arch conservative. He came from basically the Austrian school. He was a ardent defender of the gold standard. And after World War II, he was the economic advisor to President Charles de Gaulle in France. And he discovered something very similar to Triffin in the 1960s.
Awesome.
He was like, well, hold on. This whole thing's going to blow up. So if it's going to blow up, we need to save our skins. And honestly, he did the right thing. He advised Charles de Gaulle. He was like, this is unsustainable. There is inevitably going, just because it's baked into the math. Again, it doesn't matter how conservative the United States wants to be. Eventually, you will get a credit collapse in the United States that will force a collapse of the gold standard. And so what we need to do immediately is take all of our dollars, load them up onto French battleships, sail across the Atlantic, drop anchor in New York Harbor, walk into a bank and exchange every dollar for gold, load it back up onto those battleships and sail back to, Cherbourg or wherever in France and offload the gold and deposit it into our bank accounts. And that's actually exactly what the French did.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, they were like one of the only ones who did it, and good on them to do it, because it was absolutely the right call.
Can I just say too, this is another one of those episodes where the Austrian school, or someone who's sympathetic to the Austrian school, had a theory about monetary policy that got excoriated by all of the neoclassical schools, the Keynesian schools, and like that, and they ended up being right. And again, pulling all that gold out. I mean, do you want to read from some of what he had to say?
Yeah.
This
So
is important.
he's explaining the problem here, and it's actually really easy to understand. This book is for those who want to find it. This is called The Monetary Sin of the West, and the Mises Institute actually has a copy of this that you could read yourself. I highly recommend it if you're really into it. But he's laying out the problem, and he says that banks may issue currency not only against gold and claims denominated in that currency, but also against foreign exchange payments in gold. In other words, against dollars. Thus, when a central bank receives dollars in settlement of a balance of payment surplus, instead of cashing them in for gold, those dollars are included in the balance sheet. But these dollars cannot be spent, if we disregard the existence of euro dollars for the time being, in Bonn, Milan, or Brussels. Consequently, the bank that receives them invests them in the same day in the form of bank deposits or treasury bonds in the New York money market. These dollars are not reabsorbed, and what is more, they represent for the bank of the lending country a claim to U.S. gold. And then he outlines, he says, I predicted in 1961 that this system would inevitably lead to 3 types of consequences.
Listen to this.
1, a persistent deficit in the U.S. balance of payments as long as the aggregate credit supply was not deliberately and systematically contracted as the gold standard would have done automatically from day to day, hence imperceptibly. 2, inflation in the creditor countries without any compensating deflation in the debtor country, causing prices to slide upwards throughout the monetary convertible area. He means the entire West.
Yeah.
And then 3, because the commies were just going broke and starving, right?
Yeah.
And then 3, the ultimate disruption of the international monetary system by the growing insolvency of the dollar resulting from the unending accumulation of foreign dollar balances that constitute foreign claims and by the ensuing widespread inflation. And he concludes with saying, and I don't want to strain my neck anymore, so I'm just going to read from my laptop here. He concludes with saying, I also pointed out that if foreigners requested payment in gold for a substantial part of their dollar holdings, they could really bring about a collapse of the credit structure in the United States. And that's what the French did.
Yeah.
They pulled out all their dollars. And guess what? A year after they did
Yeah.
that, well, they dropped all their dollars and pulled out all their gold. And a year after they did that, Nixon pulled us off the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason for him doing that, because he realized, in a way, Nixon was trying to save us from losing all of our gold, because he realized that there are too many dollars in circulation and there's not enough gold. And if we keep on the gold standard, Fort Knox will be emptied out in 6 weeks or whatever. And so I have a choice. I can either drop the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, or I can drop the gold standard. Well, from the standpoint of the federal government, leading the free world during the Cold War, dropping the dollar as the world reserve currency would probably blow up the West in general. And it would result in the federal government losing a ton of leverage on the international stage. So from his standpoint, it just made perfect sense to drop the gold standard.
Well,
but as Rueff pointed out, like, this was inevitably going to happen. And he was totally right. He was just, and he predicted way worse things. I highly recommend people to read his book, because a lot of what he got, he was just early. He wasn't wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and we find that there's some danger in being early, because when you get the prediction wrong, or when you get the timing of the prediction wrong, people tend to think that your predictions are off, or you miscalculated, or the people that are saying there's nothing to worry about are the ones that are okay, right? But here's what I think is interesting about this. Again, the creation of the Federal Reserve was in response to a crisis, a very real crisis that they were trying to address. The response to the Great Depression, which led to massive government spending, massive government intervention in the economy, was a response to an economic crisis that was going on. If you look at, again, Bretton Woods, it was a response to a very real crisis and a very real threat that existed. And then you look at Nixon's decision in 1971, it was in response to a very real crisis and a very real threat that existed. And so the reason why we're going through all these various perspectives, whether it's Triffin, whether it's Rueff, whether it's Nixon, whether it's J.P. Morgan, it's because unless we actually understand the perspectives of the people in the context of the time they were making the decision, it becomes very easy to create these little artificial supervillains responsible for everything, as opposed to saying, this might not have been the right decision, but it's understandable why someone made it. And if you don't understand that, well, then guess what? As we look at the current crisis that we're hurtling toward, you're being offered a lot of solutions by people that may be understandable given what they're considering. But the problem is that it's usually a lot more difficult. It's not usually. It's always a lot more difficult to say, okay, how do I understand all the various things that led to this particular point, as opposed to just saying it was Biden, it was Trump, it was this, it was that. Okay, so where are we at right now? Well, we're at a point right now where, again, we talk about hyperfinancialization. So real quick, Christian, in as normal terms as you can, kind of lead us down, like, when we say hyperfinancialization, what does that mean? And what is the impact? Like, we're seeing the conditions here that were set to create hyperfinancialization. What specifically does it mean, and what's the impact?
Well, a lot of people have different terms to describe it. I gave a more technical explanation earlier in the podcast, but if you just want to kind of be blunt, it's the everything bubble is really what it is, and the impact is that you end up having all the consequences of a bubble, except it's everything. It's all asset classes, right? And so there's some people that benefit greatly from bubbles, right? And then there's other people that end up being screwed over by it. And that is what's created a huge imbalance here.
I want to add something in real quick, because I like that description. The everything bubble is, if, again, once we moved completely off of the gold standard entirely, this is important for people to understand this. The U.S. dollar became backed by nothing but the good faith and credit of the United States. So it was, hey, we're powerful and we got guns and we got a huge economy, so you can trust us that this currency has value. And let's be honest for a second. It's not as if in 1972 everyone said, well, I don't trust the dollar anymore, let's throw them out, right? It's still the world's reserve currency. So for decades now, it's still been able to limp along. The problem is that every time we've had a financial downturn, the response from the Federal Reserve, not every time, but most of the time, the response from the Federal Reserve is print money, right? And some of this is informed by Keynesian economic policy,
increasingly MMT,
and increasingly modern monetary theory, which is this idea that, well, you can never default on your debt because you can always just print more money in order to pay the debt. The problem is that as you're printing more money, the value of the individual unit of currency is decreasing. And if you print a lot, then the value is decreasing exponentially, right? So it's not that your house gained more value, the dollars decreased in value. And so now it takes more of them to buy the house. And what ends up happening, and this also goes to the Austrian theory of the business cycle, is we get into this really, really destructive boom and bust cycle where all of a sudden you have a bust. And so the Federal Reserve and everyone flips out and says, oh, no, we can't have busts, not to mention that politicians don't like to run in years where there's a bust. So what do? We're going to print a bunch of dollars. Okay, well, we have to print those dollars because if the financial markets crash, everyone's 401k crashes, businesses go out of business. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to do this temporarily infusion of money. And again, I'm going to try to be fair to Keynes. Keynes didn't believe just print money and spend it. Keynes believed that at times during economic downturns, you had to prime the pump, right, with government spending. And then what that would do is it would help usher you through the crisis, and then you would slowly raise interest rates, and you'd create a more steady, slow growth, right? So that was the theory behind it, very rudimentary, explained by me. The problem is that when you print that money, and you give it out, right? You're causing inflation. You're causing the price of everything to theoretically go up because the value.
You're especially causing asset price inflation.
Yes, because think about this. If you're someone if you're just Joe Schmo, right? I work my 40 to 50 hours a week. I collect my paycheck. I pretty much live hand to mouth. Maybe I put a little bit of money in savings. Maybe I got a retirement account or whatever it is, but that's it, right? You're not sitting there looking at it from the perspective of, oh my gosh, the Federal Reserve is about to engage in quantitative easing. I better put more stuff into the various assets that are inflation proof. You're not thinking that. You're just showing up to the grocery store realizing that, holy crap, I can't afford stuff. And now my savings isn't worth what it was before. What the hell's going on? In the meantime, let's say you are someone that understands the stock market and you are someone that understands inflationary monetary policy. You're moving your cash to either bonds, if you wanted to kind of your hedge, or you're moving it over to assets which continue to increase in value. And so, of course, you're investing in the stock market. Of course, you're investing in those things that have the ability to weather the storm because the value of your dollar is decreasing. No matter what happens, the value of that dollar is decreasing. So you got to get it into assets. Well, here's the other question. When the government prints all this money, who gets it first? Because inflation isn't felt immediately. It's not like, okay, we print $1 trillion and now inflation goes up to 9%, 10%, 14%. No. When that money first hits the market, it's either done in the form of government spending. So government gets the full value of that dollar, or it generally goes into banking because we've got to protect the assets which people are dependent upon for their 401ks or their jobs because we don't want them to lose their jobs. So now you have the assets, the people that control the assets and the people that control the government spending as getting essentially as full of value as they possibly can for that dollar when it's originally printed. The moment it starts to move into circulation, something magical happens. And that is, now that I have this money, I'm going out and I'm buying I'm buying stuff. Well, now there's more dollars than there is stuff because the overall number of dollars increased. The overall number of stuff did not. So now there's more dollars competing for the same amount of stuff, which means the stuff goes up in price.
And what you just described right there is called the Cantillon effect, which so many people on the left leave out when they bring up criticisms of it. But I want to go through some.
Well, but I want to point something out because from perspective, it becomes very easy at this point. This is critical. It becomes very easy at this point for the guy working 40 to 50 hours a week and getting poorer as he goes on to be like, what the hell is going on? And then the politician goes up and is like, well, that rich guy over there, he's doing 3 times. You're doing worse for the same amount of work. And that guy's doing better than you. How is that? He must be cheating. In reality, now I want you to imagine this. You're the perspective of the rich guy now. I don't like inflationary monetary policy. I don't particularly like these policies. I didn't vote for it. I don't like it. I don't want it. But it's happening whether I like it or not. So what do? Do I keep my money in places where it's going to be destroyed by inflation? Or do I put it into assets that are going to increase in value? Well, I put it in assets. Does that make me some sort of bad Bond villain because I'm now making more money because I understand how to operate within an inflationary economy?
So I want to show you a few charts here. And
But
by the
does that make sense?
No, I get it.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk a little bit more about this once we get to the end of this, because the income inequality side and the social effects, I think, are vastly understated at times. And this is going to create some big issues. This is why I think the system can't go on forever. I really think the system is starting to break down, but these take place over the course of years and decades. Rueff was not wrong. He was early. He was predicting this in the 70s. We're 50 years later. Everything he predicted in the 60s has transpired, but he thought the system was going to blow up. He had no idea that it could drag itself on this long. And so, but I do think that things come to an end at some point. And these charts that I'm going to show you in a second, I think, illustrate this. So before I do, I want to give a quick shout out to the channel Infonomics. He's got a really small channel. He's only got I think 15,000 subscribers, but he pulled a lot of these charts that I'm about to show you here. So feel free to take a look at some of his videos if you're really into the nitty gritty. He explains some more of the details here, but the top line stuff should be pretty easy to understand. There's winners and losers of this system. I'm going to go through some of the losers first. So this chart is hourly wages divided by gold. Divided by gold, right? Not a fiat system.
You can see why people say what happened in 1971 when you look at the bottom of the chart.
So here we are at the peak in July 1970. What do you think happened after that? Look at this. And guess what? What's crazy is that after 1980, after the chaos of the inflation and stagflation of the 1970s, actually, in some ways, Reagan comes in, and we have better fiscal policies, but we don't really have better monetary policies. In fact, actually, that's slowly getting worse. But for a while, from 1980 all the way until 2000, things were getting better, and this is why some people think that one of many of the problems was actually admitting China into the WTO, because this peak right here is when China joins the WTO. And look at what's happened since really the turn of the millennium. After 2001 or after 2000, look at this. It just falls off a cliff. And again, this is hourly wages divided by gold. So, gold is kind of, the answer to fiat in many respects. And so in a relative basis, the average person in America is getting paid less than they were 25 years ago. So hourly wages divided by gold has plummeted since we left the gold standard, which is not a shock at all when you consider, again, that we're now in a fiat system.
Well, it's also to understand that gold is not some fixed price throughout time and space.
But you can't print it.
No, you can't print it. And that's supposed to be one of the features of a sound currency, is that it's divisible, but it's also scarce. You can't just make more of it whenever you feel like it. But the price of gold, part of the reason why the price of gold has gone up so much, at the same time that real wages has dropped, is because, again, if you know what you're doing and you have the money and you see inflation going up, you get it into assets which are more inflation proof or which benefit as a result of inflationary monetary policy. And it turns out certain precious metals fit the bill for that.
So if you're keeping score of winners and losers here, since, Triffin was proven right, since Rueff was proven right, since the gold standard blew up, the average hourly wage earner in the United States has categorically been a loser. That's one thing. Here's another loser. This is personal income per capita divided by M2 money supply.
Explain M2 money supply.
M2 money supply is one of several metrics to describe how much money is in circulation. And by the way, this constantly goes up. It doesn't come when it goes down. That's what we call massive recessions. That's like 2008. That's 2020, and then we pumped it again. It went back up. So M2 almost always just goes up, almost in a straight line. When it dips, that's what we call recessions. And there's a lot of things that go into M2. It's different from M1. I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty details of that, but basically M2 implies how much money is floating out there. And so personal income per capita, so this adjusts for population growth, divided by the money supply. And it's just been falling off a cliff. Really since Bretton Woods. But what's interesting is that it kind of leveled off after the 50s and then stabilized. And then look at this. Since the 80s, it dipped again, and then it rose. And really, since the turn of the millennium, it's just fallen off a cliff. And so that's another set of losers is, personal income per capita. We're talking about just normal people right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Average hourly wages, personal income per capita. These are metrics that usually don't imply that you're only talking about people like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or stuff like that. These are normal people.
Yeah.
Here's another chart. Hourly wages divided by GDP.
Yeah.
So hourly wages the average American has just been decimated since the 60s when you divide by GDP. And the reason for it is because GDP is going up faster than hourly wages.
This is the other part too to consider here, and I think this is really important for people to understand. Is this chart has been steady.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as if something happened in 71 that impacts all of this. Here's the other thing I want people to understand when we talk about GDP, since we brought it up a couple of times here. Gross domestic product is the total, spending. So the United States GDP is somewhere around like 30 trillion. What's important to understand is that 7 trillion of that is government spending, right? Federal government spending. We're not even talking about state or local. So it's important to understand that GDP numbers are easily manipulated through inflationary monetary policy. In fact, this is why Murray Rothbard and others try to come up with a different way to exclude public spending and only count private sector spending when it came to counting GDP, because otherwise the federal government can print $1 trillion, spend it, and be like, look at our GDP numbers. They shot up by $1 trillion. So obviously there's ways to manipulate that. Mm-hmm. So again,
that's actually why this chart's dropping, because if you were to go back to, like, say, the 1880s or 90s, we were going through a lot of economic growth in that time period, but we were firmly on the gold standard.
Yeah.
This would be relatively flatline. It would only go up if GDP was contracting, and GDP would be contracting faster than hourly wages would be contracting. That's a recession, right? Yeah. And so you see spikes here, and every time this spike, I say spike, right? Every time it slows down its rate of decline, that's actually an economic downturn. So you have one in the, this is the early 80s recession. This is the early 90s recession. This is the dot-com bubble. This is the 2008 crash, and then this is COVID. Mm-hmm. And so you see this spike because GDP is not collapsing, right? But it's dropping during these recessions.
Yeah, it's not like your wages are getting better.
It's just that GDP is dropping faster.
Yeah.
But if you were under like a gold standard type system, this would be relatively flatline, because presumably the GDP would be growing at the same rate that hourly wages would be growing, because you wouldn't have money printers being able to funnel freshly printed cash to select usually politically connected entities. The reason this is dropping consistently is because it's not that hourly wages haven't risen. They have. Mm-hmm. It's that GDP's risen substantially faster. But it's not risen faster because necessarily worker productivity's gotten better. It has gotten better. Yeah. By all metrics, the economy is better off than it was 50 years ago. We have better technology. We have a better standard of living. But on a relative basis, it's overwhelmingly the benefits and gains. Yes, everybody has benefited largely to some degree. But there's a select group of politically connected people that have vastly benefited far more than the average American. Yeah. So those are the losers. This is hourly wages divided by M2 money supply. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
The money supply is increasing substantially faster than hourly wages are. Because again, an increasingly smaller number of people, this is where the left actually has a point, even if they don't realize it. An increasingly smaller number of people are gaining the vast majority of the increase in wealth. Most of it is paper, though.
Yeah.
And it's not going to normal people. And so this is what's fueling what they call income inequality. So these are all the losers. Now, who are the winners in this system? Because I just showed, personal income's dropping, hourly wages are dropping compared to GDP, compared to money supply.
Bottom line is, if you are what anybody would consider to be kind of essentially middle class or poor, which is to say that you are largely dependent on your job for your income. You don't have a lot of investments. You don't have a lot of assets. Maybe you have a retirement account. Maybe you have your house. Maybe, but you need that job. If you don't have that job, you're struggling. That's who have been the losers Fair?
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's the winners. This is federal debt to GDP. So hourly wages collapsing compared to GDP. Federal debt soaring to an all-time high. So the federal government's been a huge winner.
And this is
arguably the greatest winner in all of this has been the federal government.
Well, and this is something too that we have to acknowledge. You see a lot of debt increase in the 80s. And there's a lot of people that said Reagan didn't actually achieve economic, he didn't have sound economic policy. What he did was he cut taxes. So that might have been, like, from our perspective, that was sound. But then he also increased deficit spending. Now, again, you can look at that and say, yeah, there's problems with what Reagan did there. Like, let's be honest. And I'm saying this as someone that's a big fan of Reagan. The other, again, why did he do it? Okay, so part of the problem too is what were we trying to do? What were we trying to do all throughout the 80s? Bankrupt the Soviet Union.
And it worked.
And it worked.
But now we're going bankrupt.
So now, but again, and you had this problem where Dick Cheney was famous for saying, well, Reagan proved deficits don't matter. No, they do matter. It's just that sometimes the reason why you're incurring the deficit might be worth it. But if you're making deficits a part of your permanent policy, no, they matter, Dick.
Wow. Well,
I was saying Dick Cheney.
Oh, okay. It's like a chemo treatment. You're hoping that it kills the cancer faster than it kills you.
Yeah.
In other words, you're hoping that it bankrupts Russia before it bankrupts us.
The problem, and again, you really have to hand it to Reagan, because when you look at something like Star Wars, that really did put the Soviets on the brink. The problem is we created this permanent expectation that these deficits just don't matter. The government can just keep spending and running deficits, and we'll be fine. Look, we're the biggest world economy. Well,
so. Losers, average hourly wages, middle class, working class. Winners, huge winner here, federal government.
Yeah.
Huge winner. Here's another big winner. This is corporate profits divided by GDP.
Yeah.
So again, this is where the left brings up a critique that a lot of conservatives I don't think have a response to. They rail against Wall Street or corporate America, and the reason that it resonates with people is because this number is real, and people might not be economists, but they do get the sense that corporate America has benefited greatly from the last 40 years, whereas the working class has not. They just simply haven't.
Yeah.
And so the federal government has benefited greatly from this system. Corporate America has categorically benefited greatly from this system. Corporate profits as a percentage of GDP is greater than it ever has been at any point in American history. And again, that includes eras in history where we had sound money. And so again, this additional money that's being printed is going to a select number of people. Well, one of the people is one of the groups is the federal government. Well, another group is corporate America. Here's another winner. This is the S&P 500 divided by GDP. So the stock market, as divided by GDP, is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
So the stock market has been a huge winner from
this.
Again,
inflationary monetary policy favors those sorts of assets.
This is exactly what we're talking about when we say the everything bubble. This is the everything bubble. This is the stock market at an all-time high at the same time that hourly wages and income per capita has collapsed, and at the same time that federal debt has gone up. And I want to keep emphasizing the federal debt thing because I'm going to get somewhere with this in a second. Here's the next thing, which is the trade-weighted US dollar is also effectively almost at an all-time high. Well, that's actually not true. It was kind of at an all-time high right before the Plaza Accord in the 1980s. This doesn't go as far back, but certainly since 2008, it's at like a 15-year high. What's interesting is that this should not be the case when you consider that this is our budget deficit.
Yeah.
We're running a $1.83 trillion budget deficit. That's like a 6% debt to GDP. And this goes back to the 1930s.
Yeah.
So we had you know what this dip is? World War II.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, if you really want to get mad, if you really want to get mad, look at budget deficits during World War II and then compare them with.
So we're flat here. This is the Depression though.
Yeah.
Right. FDR's in charge and he's spending money hand over fist on, every alphabet soup government agency you can think of. And look, we're running a negative $14 billion deficit in 1937. Yeah. And then look, we fall off a cliff in World War II because we're fighting the Nazis and the Japanese. and the Italians, except the Italians don't really put up a fight.
Yeah.
And we're running a $51 billion budget deficit. But then, after the war, we come back to even. And the grand scheme of things, like, you can go back and look, we're basically flat if you go far enough back here.
Yeah.
And then, you see this drop again. This little blip is World War II.
Yeah.
And look at where we are right now.
Yeah.
This is COVID.
Yeah.
This is us trying to get out of COVID.
Yeah.
Like, you see how we're bending.
Yeah.
This is literally the slippery slope is what this is.
Do you think we've seen the full weight of the results of shutting every freaking business down during COVID? Like, what we did
we
there
currently
and
are.
infused, like, do you think we have realized the full damage
We've
that was done yet?
accelerated the slope is what's happened. So there's two more charts
Yeah.
I want to briefly show you. So the next one is this is a federal budget or surplus, right? And again, goes back and you see here it just falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
And
that one period in the 90s.
Look at it. It's so bad I have to scroll down for the viewers. This is again $1.8 trillion deficit. Now here's the trade balance. This is our trade balance, right? Positive or negative trade balance. And this goes back to I believe 1992. And look at this. This also falls off a cliff. And this is Liberation Day. This is right before Liberation Day, when we were running a $138 billion monthly trade deficit.
Yeah.
All-time historic low. And then this is Trump's tariffs trying to pull us back from that, and he got us halfway.
Uh-huh.
So this right here, the dollar should not be climbing when we're running a twin deficit.
Except for
like no country in history can be running a 6% debt to GDP in peacetime with no recession and a $1 trillion trade deficit and have their currency rise in value.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that we're the reserve currency of the world. That's
Yes.
the only reason.
Because everyone else had to print their currency in order to get our currency in order to engage in certain elements of international trade.
And this is, by the way, something that conservatives who criticize Trump's trade policy should actually understand, is that if your country's running a massive trade deficit for a substantial period of time, the market forces will eventually force a correction of your currency to devalue your currency. I'm not saying the government. I'm saying the market will eventually devalue your currency to deal with the trade deficit and make imports more expensive because you're buying more than you're spending more than you're bringing in. Think about it from this standpoint as an individual. If I am spending $100,000 a year, but I'm only bringing in $50,000 a year, well, there will be a correction eventually. Either I will bring in more revenue or I will go bankrupt and nobody will loan me money and I won't be able to buy $100,000 worth of goods a year. The same thing applies with countries in terms of international trading. I'm not saying governments meddling with things. I'm saying pure market forces would naturally drive down the value of our dollar because we're running a twin deficit. It is very rare for countries to be able to run a twin budget and trade deficit for years, decades even. Yeah. And have their currency go up in value. When we talk about the economy being broken, that's what we mean.
Well, and that's when stuff like that happens, you can look at it and be like, something is being manipulated, right? This is not a natural process that takes place in the course of voluntary exchange. There's some sort of legal manipulation that makes this possible. And this is the part where, again, when you look at this from the various perspectives, you might be able to understand why people made the decisions that they did. And now we're in a position where you're seeing, like on the right, I'm seeing more and more people say, the problem is trade, and so we're going to solve it through tariffs. Tariffs are the key to bringing back our manufacturing sector. Tariffs are the key to the wealth of a country. Okay, well, I understand why people think that. And I even understand why tariffs can be used as a proper way to achieve better trade, to achieve, the problem is that when people start to get the mindset, no, the problem is trade, right? Like that chart you showed up. It's when we let China into the WTO. That's the problem. Okay, but what is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on a foreign good or service. So what have you just done when you tax a foreign good or service? You've made it more expensive for me to buy the thing I want. Now, you could argue that, so that in and of itself does not make me wealthier. I am not wealthier because the government taxed me to buy a foreign good or service. However, if you use the tariff in such a way as to bring down or to get better trade deals, that could potentially be better for me. But that takes a step beyond the question of tariffs, right? It's the same thing with the left looking at this going, see, we told you the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. How do we solve it? Well, we solve it through a wealth tax. These people got their money by not by doing something really good. They got it by manipulating the system. Okay, but what are you offering? Well, a wealth tax, you just told me, okay, so let me get this straight. You, the politician, you, government, created a system to operate in a particular way. I'm now operating in accordance with the way that system operates. Now you're going to tax me more for doing it. What do you cause me to do? I'm going to pull out my assets and I'm going to move somewhere else. Now what happens to your economic system? You think it's bad now, right? With what you're doing? Now do it and disincentivize the people you need to keep actually the factories open and everything else. And so once again, if you're only looking at one aspect of this, well, these people are benefited from, these people are the winners in a system. The system's bad, so we're going to take money from the winners and we're going to give it to the losers. Okay, but you haven't fixed the underlying system that creates this feedback loop. Not to mention the fact that when the government takes the money in the form of taxation, that doesn't mean they equally distribute among the losers. Those politicians then spend it on their priorities. And what's their primary priority? Getting reelected.
Bastiat actually warns about this in some of his writings from the 1840s. And he says that, the suffering classes might have the greatest claim, but that does not mean that they're going to have the greatest success in terms of advocating from the legislature, redistribution of wealth towards them. Mm-hmm. He explicitly warns about this when he says, if you turn the law into a mechanism of plunder, there's going to be clamoring inside the legislative palace, he says, and everybody's going to be demanding their share, and you're going to have industry and commerce and special interests that are going to be there demanding their fair share. And he says, he's like, the poor, the working classes, they might arguably have the greatest claim, but that there is no guarantee at all that they're going to get the greatest advantages from a system of legalized plunder. Yeah. And I would argue that a lot of these charts actually kind of vindicate some of Bastiat's warnings. But I want to talk about what we do about this. Like, is there a way out of this? Yeah. So I showed you all these charts. We've talked about the prior warnings from 50, 60 years ago. And I do think that there's elements of the left and the right that both have a point, and that it's actually dangerous to ignore them. And I kind of want to address both of them. You briefly hinted at it. I want to take the left first, because we usually identify as being on the right. Yeah. So the left brings up income inequality, right? That's what they're really upset about. The rich, like you said, the rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poor. And their solution is a wealth tax. I think the charts here are very indicative of the fact that there is a substantial problem that cannot be ignored, and I think too many conservatives have actually tried to ignore it or tried to hand wave it away and say it doesn't matter. When I'm sorry, but corporate profits would not be at an all-time high if it weren't for the fact that government debt to GDP is also at an all-time high. The S&P 500 would not be at an all-time high if it weren't for the fact that debt is at an all-time high. The stock market would not be at an all-time high. Asset prices would not be at an all-time high. This is what we mean by the everything bubble. And the average American is not owning the S&P 500. They don't own Walmart or Amazon or Apple or any of the big tech companies. It's the wealthy. It's the 1% that I'm going to use leftist phrasing right now, actually, to make their argument. The 1% have absolutely increased their wealth multiple fold over since 1971, since the 60s, arguably, and certainly since 2000. And the average person, working people, are falling behind because who owns stocks? It's not, the guy with a blue-collar job. It's Jeff Bezos, it's Elon Musk that own stock in these companies. Their net worth has gone up tremendously. And what do they do with their net worth? They then bid up the price of everything else. Why are the price of homes at an all-time high? Because we're not building them faster than the rich are buying them. BlackRock is going out there and they're buying up large tracts of homes for Americans, and they're bidding up the price of stuff. And even if they're not nefariously doing it, even if they're not evil people that are doing it, we know that that prices are a signal. And that if I'm going out there and here's a perfect example. My parents were trying to buy land in Madison County. They're not wealthy people. They have money, but they are not the 1%. Yeah. They're not even like the 5%. They wanted to buy some land to retire and to eventually build a house on in Madison County. And they went out there and they were outbid every single time by multimillionaires in Northern Virginia that were moving down there and outbid them. And that's a perfect example of people that have wealth, the top 1%, using their wealth that they've massively accumulated faster than the average working people. And we showed the charts that show that working people are getting hosed right now. And what are they doing with that money? They are then going into the marketplace and they are driving up the price of tangible things that people need, like homes, like land, like real estate, like cars. And the market cannot produce these things faster than the degree to which wealth is artificially being created on paper. And so you're creating an imbalance there where increasingly a smaller and smaller subset of the population have access to things that 60 years ago we thought were just normal things. We thought in the 1950s that you could have the man work one job and support a whole family of 4 or even 5 and have a normal middle-class lifestyle with a house that he owns outright, with a car that he owns outright, and that the wife doesn't need to work unless she wants to. And now you can't even buy a house, a normal house, without being outbid by a multimillionaire or a Fortune 500 company. And that is a left-wing critique that I don't think that the right currently has an answer for. And the left-wing solution, which we can all debate, is, and so the solution is we need a wealth tax to address the fact that the 1% have a disproportionate number of assets that they did not earn themselves. They got it because the government is printing money. So I'm kind of fusing a bit of a left-wing critique with a slightly libertarian analysis of monetary policy. But that's the strongest left-wing argument that I can articulate.
And I saw there was a channel that you sent me to watch, and I watched as this guy went through the process, and he was critiquing both the left and the right, but then ultimately came up with a left-wing solution, which was the wealth tax, right? Because that seems the easiest to grasp. These people have a lot of money. This massive amount of people do not. This other people got it, through essentially unjust or unethical ways. That's the way it's generally pitched. There's two things we have to. The first one is if we just want to be intellectually honest about two things. One is we have to be intellectually honest about the concept of income inequality, and we also have to be intellectually honest about the way the super wealthy have gained their wealth. So, if we're going to be honest about income inequality, we have to acknowledge two things. One, conservatives do, but they talk about it in the worst way possible, and that is every single society ever since. There is no such thing as income equality. The only place where you technically have income equality is prison, and even there's a hierarchy that gets made, right? So you're not going to have income equality. Not only that, it's not just. It is not just to have income equality in the sense that the doctor makes the same amount of money as the janitor, right? So the difference is that typically the way people view income inequality is if they can justify it in their own heads. So they say, yes, doctor makes more than janitor. I understand that. It's not because the doctor is necessarily a better person than the janitor. It's because the service that they're providing is in high demand and the number of people available to provide that service is in low supply. And so the price goes up. I get that. I'm okay with that. What they don't understand is, again, what we might call unethical or what they might call unjustifiable income equality. Now, this is the part where, again, you're not going to come up with the right solution if you don't blame the right thing. They're saying, well, that rich guy, Jeff Bezos, nobody deserves to be worth X amount of money. Well, first of all, that's a stupid thing to say. I hate it when people, okay, well, great. Then who deserves what and who's going to decide? You're elected. Is Nancy Pelosi going to decide? Is Elizabeth Warren going to decide? Like, save me your platitudes. But I agree that there's a problem. Now, Jeff Bezos may be responding to a situation he didn't create. Yeah, that's what we do. Human beings react with the information that we have. And if you put me in a bad situation, I will attempt to make the best out of it. And if I can find a way to profit out of that bad situation, What am I supposed to do? Not profit? Right? That's the argument. I know very, very few human beings that refuse to actually make the best out of a bad situation or find a way to actually do well off the bad situation.
But we know from history that...
Wait a second. I need to complete this thought. The problem is that some of those people then buy in and start to create the bad situations in order to profit from them, right? They say, okay, well, if this is the way it's going to run and I found a way to make money off of it, now I want to defend the bad system, or I want to get the people elected that will give me access to the bad system so that I'm okay. That's where you move from responding to a bad situation as best you can into helping to create or craft the bad situations for your own benefit. I'm not saying Bezos did that. I'm saying that's the part where we move from one moral category to another moral category. The problem is that too many on the right want to play make-believe that nobody has moved into that category of manipulating the system for their own benefit. And the left want to pretend that everybody who's in that category conducted themselves, have moved themselves into to manipulate. That's not it. There's this one meme I love, and I should have brought it up because I like it. And it shows two categories. And it shows a block, and it says, like the wealthy and everybody else.
I know what you're talking about.
And then the other, and on one it says, my enemy, not my enemy. And what it's essentially saying is those who want to manipulate the system to get something for nothing, whether they're wealthy or poor, are the enemy. It's not the people that are just wealthy. It's not the people that are just poor. It's what are they offering as the solution to the problem. And what the left is offering is give me power and I will steal from people that have stuff and give to people who don't have stuff without asking any questions about how they got the wealth versus how they became poor. There are some people that are in the middle class that are poorer than they should be as a result of these sort of economic, fiscal, and monetary policies. There are some people that are poor because they make a series of horrible decisions. There are some people that are wealthy because they've made very, very good decisions. And there are some people that are wealthy because they've done a really good job of manipulating the system through politics or any other number of mechanisms. Saying wealth tax does not differentiate between the positive things that create wealth and the negative things that create wealth. And so what you will end up with is the same sort of incentive structure. I'm no longer figuring out what is the best way to provide goods and services in an economy in order to benefit myself by benefiting my customers, right? Or benefiting, who I'm working for. Instead, it's which politician do I have to run to in order to get my cut? And I don't know if the left doesn't understand this, which would be bad. It would be a result of ignorance, or they do understand this, which would be bad because that's nefarious. Now you're trying to set yourself up to be in the position to decide how resources are distributed, not because you've earned them, not because you have some sort of special knowledge with respect to economic development or productivity, but because you have the ability to manipulate the electorate to accumulate power so that you can now use force in order to decide who gets the wealth. And that's what I see the left is offering. I understand the problem that they're identifying. I even agree with them on certain points. But the moment I see that offered as the solution without any sort of address, let me throw the left a bone, which may shock you. If the left said, we want some redistributive policies because the only way that we're going to be able to fix the underlying problems with respect to our monetary policy or our fiscal policy or government spending is to essentially prevent an outright rebellion. Because one of the things the right doesn't seem to understand about income inequality is
I was going to bring that up.
Once it reaches a certain point, nobody cares about your economic arguments anymore. Somebody's getting shot. So if the left were to say, okay, Nick, let's compromise. We believe that there's a certain degree of redistribution that is necessary for a temporary period of time while we navigate reforming our monetary and fiscal policy and the overall role of government in manipulating the economy. I would say, I'm listening. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying maintain these policies the way that they are. I don't see a single Democrat arguing for sound monetary policy. I don't see a single Democrat advocating for actually cutting government spending. I don't see a single Democrat advocating for less government regulation and manipulation of the economy. All I see them doing is saying, we want to be in charge so that as it's being manipulated, we can manipulate it in the directions we want it manipulated.
And so they actually, in a way, there's a huge chunk of the left that they're totally fine with this.
Yep.
They just want the charts. They want the graphs that show all the lines going up to be going up towards their buddies.
Mm-hmm.
And they want all the lines that show them dropping to be dropping towards their enemies, is ultimately what this is. They want to redistribute wealth towards their politically connected groups rather than actually bring about some sort of reign of justice. And I don't mean that in a leftist sense.
Yeah.
I mean that in an actual like sound monetary sense. Because you're right, to your point, it's not like the people on the left are saying, you know, government money printing has created an entire class of people that are, you know, elitely, you know, that's not a word, but, you know, that are, you know, in ultra elite that are extremely wealthy beyond their means only because they're politically well connected. And so therefore we need to stop this massive, you know, distortion of the monetary system and then fix that problem. No, they want to keep that going. They just want to make sure that they're the elite that are benefiting from the broken monetary system.
Well, and I think their argument would be is that, and because we have,
increasingly a lot of them are the elite, by the way.
Yeah, and well, yeah, Nancy Pelosi is not wondering about where her next, you know, beach house will come from.
This is why, like, it's the right that have become more populist, not the left.
Yeah.
Left-wing populism arguably died with Occupy Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
The left has become the people that have benefited from the system over the last 40 years. They're the managerial class. They're the donor class. They're, you know, the bureaucracy. These are all, you know, individuals and groups that have greatly benefited from the fiat monetary system. It's the right that has become populist.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I want to get to, because we talked about the left side of it. The right side of it also has increasingly a take that's at odds with traditional conservative economic orthodoxy, which is they're really into tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
They've become substantially more economically populist. And the reason for it is because look at who's been on the losing side of this equation for 40, 50, 60 to 80 years. It's been Rust Belt workers in the Midwest that have basically become Republicans at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to be Democrats, or at least their parents or grandparents were.
Yeah.
And so on the right, to the income inequality side, I think the traditional conservatives, like the Reagan type conservatives, the free market conservatives, they don't seem to understand that like you brought up, there comes a point where the economics just breaks down and social forces take hold. This is what happened in the Roman Republic, right? The Gracchi brothers were literally advocating for redistributing wealth. They wanted to redistribute land. And their argument was there's too many slaves. They've crowded out the free man, many of whom fought in the wars that imported these slaves into the Republic. And so therefore, we want to redistribute land away from the senatorial elite to the landless poor masses that have been, you know, carrying the Republic on their backs for the last, you know, generation. And they were murdered for it. But eventually, I mean, the Republic imploded because you just got to a point where there was so much populist outrage that you ended up having, they ushered in a Caesar figure.
Well, and you do get to a point where, again, when people get hungry, they're not really interested in your complex economic arguments. They're interested in not being hungry. And you can sit there all day long and explain how your economic solution will actually achieve that hunger if they're just willing to be patient. And they're like, I'm not willing to be patient. I've heard this before. This is the part where, again, I think the right needs to acknowledge that it is fine to make a very logical and economically sound argument, but you better start putting it in terms that actually address the underlying issues here. And one of the things that Trump has done successfully is he's managed to point to certain problems that people look at and think that makes a lot of sense, and he started to address that. Now, one of the things that concerns me about what Trump is now trying to do on the right too is he's now trying to push to lower interest rates. And I think if I had to guess what the strategy is here, it's like, okay, we're cutting taxes. And this is another trope from the left that I just cannot stand. It's like, oh, you're cutting taxes on the wealthy. Something needs to be understood here, right? And this is not me making this up. This is just factual. About 90% of the federal taxes in this country are paid by the top 10%. 47% of the population essentially contribute nothing to federal income taxes. And when you consider transfer payments, roughly 40% of the country actually gets more from the government than they pay into the government. Right? That's just reality. Okay. The problem is that people don't feel that. And if you just say, well, the rich are getting more in the tax cuts, that's because they're the ones paying the vast majority of the taxes. If you do a tax cut, the people that pay taxes will benefit from it. I've made this argument before in the Virginia General Assembly when we've said, hey, we're going to do a tax cut on this bracket. And they're like, or all brackets. And like, oh, the most of the money is going to the wealthy. Well, first of all, what they describe as the wealthy is now someone making like $100K a year, which we'll understand is not wealthy. Secondly, if I give you money and you're not a net taxpayer, I have not cut your taxes. I've engaged in additional government spending. I've engaged in redistributive policy. And they don't acknowledge that. If you really wanted to get to a point where everyone was, quote, paying their fair share, most Democrats would hate that policy because it would actually cause for taxes to increase on the people that are currently getting redistribution payments. That's what would end up happening. And so we need to understand that this whole like tax the rich, they are being taxed. And people, well, they have these various mechanisms and capital gain. Okay, but their income is taxed at a higher rate. They do have capital gains. They do have property. And you're right, there's a ton of tax shelters and everything else. But at the end of the day, they're still paying. The top 10 to 20% of income earners are paying almost all of the taxes. So when the left tells you this is just a question of taxing billionaires more, they're lying. They're not being honest about who's actually paying the taxes. Having said that, if you can't afford to pay any more taxes, or even though you're not paying taxes, you still can't afford to buy a house or anything else, that is a really good argument to you that Elon Musk should be paying more because that guy's got 12 houses, right? That's still a very convincing argument. And so this is the part where, again, I don't know, like I see what Trump is trying to do, and I think he's trying to grow us out. He's trying to grow us out of the deficit. This has always been the argument. And when people look at it like, well, we need to cut more spending, the problem is that it's politically unpopular to cut spending. It's politically very popular to say, we'll just grow ourselves out of it. The problem is that as you experience the growth, you have a certain sector of the population and you have a certain sector of the electorate that will say, we're doing well. We need more money in transfer payments. We need more investments in education. We need more investments in healthcare. We need more investments. Can I just say something right now? Investing is something you do with your own money or with money that people voluntarily give you. The government doesn't engage in investment. The government engages in redistribution or the spending of money on essential government services. We can argue what those should be. But this investment term is something I hate when it's applied to government, because politicians taking your money and then spending it the way they want is probably not the best way to invest. Unless, of course, what you're investing in is them getting reelected, because I guarantee you that's how they're prioritizing the dollars spent. So I think we need to wrap it up by kind of talking about this, and that's kind of the where do we go from here on a macro level. I think we can all agree on this table, regardless of how that's achieved. There's no way out of this on a macro level without eventually returning to sound money. And we could make the argument that eventually we will. It's just a question of how much pain or potentially bloodshed it takes to get there. Because this is not sustainable, right? They started predicting it wasn't sustainable. You know, in the 60s, you had a lot of voices going out there predicting things. And like you said, they weren't wrong on the overall predictions. They might have been wrong on the timeline. But a fiat currency with the world's reserve currency, this is not sustainable. We're going to continue to run into problems until eventually you have a revolt, a revolution, whatever else it might be. We agree on that?
Absolutely.
Everyone's saying yes.
Yes.
Okay. There's two ways. First of all, most of the people that are currently benefiting from this system probably do not want to return to sound money. Is that pretty fair?
I think the overwhelming majority, believe it or not, I think even some people that have been on the losing side of this equation and they don't realize that a return would probably benefit them.
Yeah. So you have this problem where the thing that if there's no way to correct eventually, without sound monetary policy, because that's the only thing that has the ability to kind of rein in the sort of exorbitant government spending that you see. If the political will isn't there to do that, then what that suggests is that we will continue to move in a direction until you have a crisis so big that it can't be ignored and it ends in, something pretty bad. I would hope that with enough education over time, we can convince an ever-growing sector of the electorate that this is in their best interest, and that they would actually vote for politicians willing to do it. But I don't see how you get there without a massive reorganization of the way we actually perform education in the country. So here's the question.
I just don't think that nobody campaigns on austerity and wins.
No.
And the problem is we have a political system where they can take from their electorate in order to give to other portions of their electorate to buy votes. And essentially they can pander to one side and demonize the other side, get money from whoever in society, and then buy votes with it.
And can we also be honest?
As long as that's the issue, as long as that is the case, I don't think this does fix itself without violence.
Well, and can we be honest? This goes back to the Thomas Sowell quote, because everyone at the electorate is looking at the politicians going, "Why do you guys do this?"
Right.
Because it works every election year with you.
Because you want them to. Ultimately, you get what you vote for.
Because anybody that's going to campaign on, "Hey guys, I got a great plan," it's going to take 10 to 20 years to implement. It's going to be this slow process where we return to sound money. Step one.
It's going to be a little painful.
Step one is we're going to massively cut government spending. Step two is we're going to take all of these entitlements that are essentially draining the federal budget, and we're going to off-ramp them onto either states that want to pick them up themselves and then continue the same death spiral at the state level, or private sector solutions, which you actually own in the private sector, but the government doesn't control or manipulate. Right? So that's step two. Step three is we're going to drastically remove the government from the regulatory environment and from manipulating the overall economy. And within the next 10 to 20 years, what's going to happen is a lot of your 401ks that were completely dependent on an inflationary monetary policy, which propped up the market way beyond what it should be, are going to take a massive nosedive. I'm
sure that party is going to win in a landslide.
Oh,
in the
yeah,
next
yeah.
election.
Now, in the end, though, within 20 years, we're going to be back roaring like you would not believe. We're going to have sound currency. We're going to have economic growth, which is actually built upon producing real products and services that people like, and it's going to be sustainable. Oh, it's going to be your great grandchildren are going to be growing up in this sort of economy you would have dreamed of, where there's a truly meritocratic system where if you work hard and you go into the areas and the industries which actually need the goods and services that you're providing are going to be really successful. Your great grandchildren are going to thank you.
Yeah, that doesn't work in an immediate gratification society where, I mean, none of us, in many ways, none of us opt for a period of difficulty for the sake of our future selves. Like we don't treat our health that way.
Yeah.
We don't treat our education that way. We don't treat our relationships that way. It's all about what gives me the most comfort right now.
Well, I will say this, though. The wealthiest, most successful people are the ones that actually master delayed gratification.
But the electorate is not going to do that. I mean, again,
Probably
nobody has ever lost an election from spending too much money, but people have lost their heads.
So
which is why I've duped you both into making my argument for monarchy for me. So the solution is to just do away with elections and do away with politicians and bring back the crown, and then they will balance the budget. And the plebs won't have the ability to elect Democrats to office to perpetuate this cycle anymore.
Okay, okay, Diocletian.
I mean that, and in a dream,
like Christian have like serious. I'll say it later.
In a dream case scenario, we did just actually explain why I became basically a monarchist, because I don't think that I haven't changed on the economic outlook of things. I've just realize that there is no voting your way out of this problem. But this problem cannot go on forever. You cannot have a twin deficit with a rising currency and a exploding degree of income inequality. Like, again, as the Infonomics channel, the guy behind that brought up, he said something like, this is going to end eventually in like Marie Antoinette scenes in Manhattan and in Washington, D.C. And it's going to be the mob is just going to be taking out vengeance on people blindly, and they don't realize what's driving this. And then you're not going to get a monarchy the way that I want. You're just going to get a straight up dictatorship.
Well, okay, someone that still likes the idea of a constitutional republic. Let's go ahead and say this. So we've kind of addressed that. Look, the way that our politics are currently structured, and you believe that there's certain solutions to that. I don't necessarily agree with that, but let's get beyond that. As an individual, though, again, we still have some degree of control over our own lives. There's a lot of things we can't control. We can't control whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to lower interest rates or the federal government's going to continue to work at $2 trillion deficits. We can vote, and you should. You can educate your kids to vote wisely, and you should. And all of that theoretically could have an outsized impact over a generation, right? I always say this, right? You get 20% of the kids into educational environments where all of a sudden they understand these sorts of things and vote appropriately. You could theoretically create some pretty significant change in a relatively short period of time. But you can't control that. You can control you. So we're going to go around the table now. What should you do? What should you do? Christian.
This segment is brought to you by gold, bars, and Bitcoin.
Oh, Andrea's about to unload.
Christian, your Bitcoin's doing pretty well, isn't it?
Bitcoin is doing quite well. No, seriously, like on an individual,
individual level. And again, okay, disclaimer for YouTube: we do not offer financial advice. We're simply talking. We do not have any financial, legal, or revolutionary advice. We're just talking about, like, as we look at this and as we think of what is the most likely thing to happen over time. And it could be, again, it's one of those 10 years, 30 years, who knows, right?
Yeah.
What should you do that seems to make sense?
Well, that's why I joked and said, this segment's brought to you by gold and Bitcoin, because like to your, going back to what you just said, like, yeah, it's not financial advice, but like, it's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Like 100% of my assets right now are in gold and Bitcoin. I don't own any stocks anymore.
Really? You used to be really big into that. That was your like daily hobby.
100% of what I own is gold and Bitcoin. It might end up being real estate too in the future. We'll see. I'm looking for a house right now. But on an individual level, I think that the only thing that you as a person can do is to try to break out of this cycle and escape the fiat system as much as you possibly can, because you're going to be on the losing end of that curve. Remember all those charts that showed the numbers just dropping? Well, you don't want to be in that group. You want to be in the group that's rising. And unless you're the federal government or, the S&P 500 or, one of the big tech companies, you're not in that crowd. And so how do you be on the winning side of this? Well, the best piece of advice I can give you is, it's generally good advice to back away from anything that's inevitably going to collapse. And the fiat system is inevitably going to collapse. Yeah. And so pulling yourself out of that as quickly as possible is like escaping a burning building that's about to, fall down on itself. Yeah. And regardless of how it falls down on itself, look, we might have some, communist dictatorship that takes over. I don't want that. Or maybe we have some, or maybe you have a bunch of Thomas Souls that get elected and fix the system.
The American Javier Milei comes.
But remember when I said that, like, you're going to get Marie Antoinette scenes in Manhattan and Washington? That would probably end up producing a French Revolution style government, which is not one that I want to live in, right? Those would be bad guys running the show. They might fix the problem insofar as you're not having a fiat system that's creating an artificial, elite wealthy class. But I guarantee you they're going to be putting in something in place that's going to be awful. Like, you want to know a great way to fix the system? Let's just have North Korea. Like that we'd all be equally poor, right? But or Venezuela. Like, we could easily go in that direction where the mob ends up falling for a socialist, regime.
The mom dying.
That'd be awful. That would be horrible. That would fix the wealth inequality problem, and it would replace it with
going back to the bad. So gold, Bitcoin, this is the Christian.
The reason that I'm bringing that up is because I know that the current bad system is not sustainable, but that does not mean it's going to be replaced with a good system. It could very well be replaced with just another different type of bad system.
Which historically happens a lot.
Can I ask a question about your situation? Because you said gold bars and Bitcoin. Gold bar wise, are you actually getting gold bars
I'm slowly
that
starting
you
to accumulate
actually
that.
have in your possession, or is this all?
He's not going to say that so
Excuse
people
me,
can rob him.
No, okay. All right. I'm not trying to find out for the sake of, shaking you down for your gold bars.
So at the moment, what I'm doing
The question is, do you physically
Yes.
have any of this, or can it just be wiped
At
away
the-
or deleted or whatever?
well, I mean, people argue this with Bitcoin all the time, and I'm not going to get into the debate about that. But on the gold front, at the moment, I'm doing the thing that you should not be doing, which is I have it in an exchange traded fund. There's all sorts of gold funds that are tracking the value of gold in vaults in like New York or London or something like that. So that's where I have it in right now, which that's typically not what you want. You typically want physical possession.
You want possession of it.
But I am working towards that. I have physical possession of silver, for example. And once I have,
Where? No, I'm kidding.
like I'm going to tell you, give me the keys to your Bitcoin.
Yeah.
No. So the
What I want to know is
to your
how
point
much
though that
lead
like
you have
and
invested in.
somebody brought up in the comments once that they should rename this the To Your Point Show because I love using that phrase. I need to stop using that phrase, and now I'm going to intentionally use it. To your point. No, I think that gold and Bitcoin are two things that you should have. I think real estate is something that you should get. Land is something you should get. They're not making any more of it. Make yourself self-sufficient. Pull yourself out of the fiat system. Avoid holding dollars in treasury bonds. Don't ever okay, you said that you're not giving advice. I will give advice. Never, ever, ever own treasury bonds. Ever. If you were invested in treasury bonds, you are a sucker and a loser, and you deserve to lose your money to the federal government because you're going to get a negative return over the next 30-something years. Treasury bonds are a losing game. At the very least, replace treasury bonds with something else like silver or gold or Bitcoin or just anything other than dollars.
Shannon Rice said, didn't FDR make owning gold illegal? Yes, he did. And he set the price of gold based off of his lucky numbers. Not hyperbole, actually did it.
Oh, he revalued it after he confiscated it from everybody. So that's why you want to physically own it, because when the government bans it, you just bury it.
How do they
right?
get it? Like, my gold got lost with my guns in a boating accident.
That's the negative political outcome, right? I said that you might have a political outcome that replaces something that we currently have, which is bad, with something that's arguably worse. You could also have. It's not out.
Christian, we got to move on to other people's bug out plans.
I just want to give people some optimism because I usually am dooming and blackpilling them. It is just as likely that you get a Malay figure eventually. If this continues and the wheels start falling off the bus. Argentina didn't just keep electing Peronists forever. They did for a long time, right? But eventually they put Malay in, and Malay is, without question, the best world leader right now of any figure on the globe. He gets it better than anybody else. And so I don't want people to just think I need to run off into the woods in Idaho and bury a bunch of gold and hoard Bitcoin and stock up on rifles. Maybe you should do all that stuff, but don't lose hope that we're just going to get a bunch of Mondami socialists in and everything's just going to blow up and that's it. And it's going to be Mad Max all the way down. There is absolutely no guarantee that that's going to happen.
All right. Do you want to go next or you want me to go next?
I will.
Okay.
I will go next because I'm short. I'm quick to the point. Okay. So to my point.
To her point, not your point.
No, I would just say my earlier point was that I didn't think that this all comes to a head peacefully and corrects itself peacefully, and people don't just get elected with a promise of austerity measures. This happens violently. So to me, I say it's a time to lean way, way into your Second Amendment rights. Buy a lot of lead. Invest in bullets. I'm not kidding. I'm not even playing around. Invest in bullets and invest in guns. Now, you need a lot of guns that shoot the same type of bullets. So do not go out and be like, I'm going to be a gun collector now and I'm going to get every different type of gun there is and every other type of bullet there is. No. Get a whole bunch of guns that work really, really well, all the same way with the same, same bullets. So they're more interchangeable. Pick the best that you like and have an arsenal. And you need an arsenal that is so full of bullets, you would just so many bullets. And I'm just saying, then somebody that's got their gold bars and doesn't have bullets, now you have gold bars.
So basically what Tina's saying is she will welcome you into her fiefdom where you will hand over your gold bars and pick the turnips.
I will allow you to invest.
Make the conquest ethic great
Yeah.
again.
So basically what this comes down to is Christian's episode is brought to you by gold bars and Bitcoin. Tina's episode is brought to you by bullets. Okay. All right.
So what's your solution?
All right. So my solution, I'm going to offer people kind of a two-tier approach because I think you should actually plan for both. All right. So there's the optimistic version of my solution and there's the non-optimistic version of my solution. I will tell you the thing that I think is universal, and this is going to sound strange, but just bear with me. I'm really investing in community. And here's why. It's great for you to have your gold bars, right? Totally support gold bars. It's great for you to have your bullets. Totally support your bullets. But if you're isolated, I'm taking both, baby, with my gang of highway riders. Right? So I'm investing in community. I honestly believe this. And the reason why I think and here's what I mean by it more specifically. I am increasingly looking for other people that kind of share just a basic worldview. Because what makes a good country and a good economy work? High trust societies. And I think we're moving to a point gradually. People are kind of self-selecting with the states that they choose to move to. Like people are not just moving for economic conditions anymore. They're actually moving for worldview. And so I look at that as well. I'm looking for who are the people that I trust in a bad situation. And it's people that share my values. That's what it comes down to. It's people that share my values. And so more and more, I'm that's what I'm looking for. How do I, and it's not because I'm looking at everybody as, who is my potential buddy in the event of the apocalypse. It's more of because the best way I can work to save the things I care about is to foster closer relationships socially and economically with the people who share those end states. So insofar as we can save the country, which is my goal, it's going to come from working in closer conjunction with people when it comes to social, economic, and educational environments. And to the extent that I can help build upon that and foster that network and foster that community, whether it be in person, online, et cetera, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. And again, that doesn't exclude buying gold bars and bullets. But I think one of the things that we've all kind of realized within a global economy and within social media and everything else is that we felt increasingly atomized. And when you are atomized, when it's just you and your family on your little compound, well then guess what? You're also easy to manipulate, easy to control, and easy to conquer. I'm increasingly focused on this idea of, again, how do I find my people? And how do I help them find me? Right? And to that extent, I do think it's a great idea for people to learn more about how to, maybe raise or grow their own food, not because they're going to be completely independent and self-sufficient, but because it's good to know. And because there's something valuable in knowing that, not just for you and for your own sense of security or your own sense of mindfulness. It's great for your kids. It's wonderful how being able to develop that sort of stuff and offering that experience to your kids also makes them more resilient and more capable of being able to go. Because again, you can have all the gold bars in the world, but what are you buying, right? What are you buying? And I want to be able to know that, look, if it ever got really bad, I know how to grow this stuff. I know how to raise this stuff. I know how to do that properly. And I know how to do it in conjunction with other people that also know how to do those things and value those things and value the sort of worldview that is necessary in order to foster that environment. And I think I have a theory. This is my optimistic theory because I am the eternal optimist. The more people that are actually forming the sort of communities where we work together, we help one another, we have each other's back. We don't believe everything in lockstep, but we have a certain core fundamental sense of values that allow us to operate in those sort of high trust societies. Then the more of those people kind of coalesce and work together and work to improve, first and foremost, themselves. How do I become, like for me, how do I become a better man so I can become a better husband, so I can become a better father, so I can raise a stronger family? And then once I have that, it's how do I find other people doing the same thing? Because those people in conjunction, that forms community. And enough of those communities together is the sort of thing that actually impacts your local government, your state government, your federal government, and hopefully changes the whole thing around. But if we don't, well, we know who we can depend on in a crisis. So that's what I'm shooting for. That's my solution. I hope you have found this episode useful. I hope, once again, I hope that what we've done is been honest with respect to what the nature of the problems are and looking at it from the various perspectives, understanding that a lot of times some of the bad things that we're dealing with now were made by not just a bunch of supervillains, but by people that were trying to make the best decision possible within the context and the knowledge that they had. But now we've got more knowledge, right? And there's going to be people that come after us that will look at the decisions we make and wonder whether or not we did a good job. So I think it's always important to have a little bit of grace. But if we're not actually learning from the mistakes of the past and identifying the sources of the problem so that we can make better decisions going forward, then ultimately we are setting up our own kids and our own grandkids and our own great-grandkids for failure. And quite frankly, delayed gratification is not just about what you do for your investment strategy. It's about the decisions you make with respect to how you make a better world for your kids. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. Consider joining our little happy group and family and community. Check out the link in the description. We do a lot of stuff where we are trying to build that sort of community where it does hopefully impact a better future. Once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.